Yes, okay, here we go. Got it. Okay, there we go. Hello, hello. Hi.
Hello, hi. Oh my gosh, I'm so excited again to have Dan Winter with me. I think we're going to be posting these on both of our forums, so we're together in this, but I'm so honored again to speak with you and to go deeper as you're excited to with the rainmaking, with the tornadoes, and then I'm wanting to get into bliss and how the galactic genetic history pertains to now. And so we're going to just navigate through all these different subjects together today.
It's fun, and I must say that your contagious enthusiasm is really so important here because it keeps me young, and that's important too, you know.
Yeah, you have the youngest heart. You're
Yeah.
very youthful, so you're fine.
Actually, but I was watching you on your recent interview on Gaia TV, and you look
Hmm.
so mature and like together and confident. It was really impressive, I must say.
Well, it's very official over there. And you know the owner and he's like, "Less hands. What are you doing with your hands? You need to be more like scripted." And I'm like, "On YouTube I can do whatever I want." And it keeps people entertained.
Yeah, I
So,
remember you said you were negotiating with those guys, and yeah, I was there when we set up the lab, and that's a long story, but that was cool. But I noticed that you look differently than you did on the beach here in South France somehow.
yeah, did I? How did I look different?
Well, you looked at, so much more like mature or together or something. It was cool.
I'm glad to hear that. I
It was
think
cool.
that's good.
It was
Awesome.
cool. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I got all enthused when you see, we've been trying to teach this science of rainmaking for a long time.
Yes. Yes.
goldenmean.info/rain. And we had some amazing successes in Brazil. And the original story was here in South France and rituals and stories. But then you mentioned that you had some fun recently with that. I'd love to hear about that a little bit.
Yes, we sure did here in the Sedona, Arizona community. Thanks to you, we did a podcast earlier this year, and you instructed, with the science of rainmaking, and I was like, I'm going to incorporate this because the monsoon hadn't come in 2 or 3 years at all. And so we need rain here in the desert. And so we put those pieces into practice. And I'm actually curious to ask you some of why certain things came to pass. But the main thing that we did was a ceremony with the children. I think we had 7 or 9 kids, and we did have their parents around, and we went out to this mesa, and that has a high amount of charge, like the
Mhm.
lightning always strikes there, and it's a powerful place that I've cultivated for a long time. And we sat with the kids and we talked to the elementals, and it was more new for them, because it wasn't something that culturally we do. It's like, okay, kids, we're gonna like call in the rain, but they started to get it, and then some of them could like start to smell it, start to see it, and we just went off the cuff with different ways of doing that. We had some charged stones
Oh,
in the
yes, that's what I was
middle.
going to ask you to use. So you did play with the stones because the little stones kind of circle or cross or something is pretty helpful.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah,
Cool.
we had the kids, yeah, set the stones, and then I mean where we were, I mean there's quartz, like embedded in all of the whole mesa too. And so after that we were like, okay, the rain, we did the ceremony for the rain, but we encouraged the kids to continue to talk to the elementals. And then after a couple, like there was a few days that went on, and then the rains hadn't yet come, and this is where it gets really interesting, and I'm curious. And then actually fires came, and we were like, oh no, like we need the rain. And one of my friends, because I had also been communicating with the ancestors of this land, and she had been down by the rivers communicating with the ancestors, and a few weeks before the ceremony, the ancestors came to her clairvoyantly, fully. Like they saw her, she saw them through time. And they said to her, if you don't want the fires to come, you need to plant the three sisters. You need to plant corn, bean, and squash.
Ah.
And
Mhm.
so this had happened a few weeks before our ceremony, and so the rains hadn't come yet, and but it felt like they were trying to. Like the clouds were coming in, but it wasn't coming down, and then the fires were kind of starting, and we're like, "Oh man, this is a mess." And then I said to my friend, "Did you plant the three sisters like the native through time space came to tell you to do?" And she was like, "No, I haven't yet." And I'm like, we need to go right now and go like do what these ancestors told us to do. So I had some pretty nice heirloom charged beautiful
Oh,
corn
good.
and
Yes.
squash and like some
Yes.
charged seeds, and we went and did that ceremony. And I think it was the next day the monsoons came in like droves, and it was the biggest monsoon season in a decade.
Ah, yes. So this was Sedona area, right? Is it?
Yeah,
Yes. Yeah.
this is
Yeah.
Sedona.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just us. There were many people around the community that were really like calling it in, praying. There was like a lot of devotional energy within like the whole community this
Mhm.
year. But it was interesting, and I just find it curious like the connection particularly with the ancestors to then bring the elementals into form. Could you speak on that, or like why you think that was coming
Yeah.
through?
Well, this is beautiful. But also, do you know which tribes they were, the native peoples?
Yeah, Yavapai would probably be the ones here. There were some like Apache. There was quite a few different ones in this
And
area that, yeah.
your ancestors, you have a native ancestry also, don't you? Do I remember?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and my friend has Cherokee, and then
Ah,
I have Ute. So we had some of
I
that in
see.
us.
Yes. Yes. Yes.
But yeah, my ancestors are from direct north on this ley line. So
I
the
see.
Ute.
Yes. Well, there's a beautiful story here in terms of, remember the famous Hopis were saying that, this ancient corn would only grow if you sang the right song to it. And
Mm-hmm.
and the relationship of the genetic material to the plasma elementals is so important. So that story about the
Mm.
three sisters is really relevant. Part of this is obviously the magnetic line, that the strength of energy, that the site you chose, and a bit of the stones. And the elementals love kids and any kind of pure intention with kids. So that's a fabulous start, fabulous. And then the fact that you actually contacted the elementals, the ancestors, and really heard that story, because that's another piece of the puzzle we wanted to discuss. We were interviewing Blue Eagle in Canada recently, for
Mm.
Valerie's group, ConsciousEarthAlliance.com. And he was talking about the fact that the ancestors there would do these ceremonies for days at a time. And I remembered when I was with the Iroquois, thanks to David Yarrow, Haudenosaunee, and that whole story. And they were talking about doing ceremonies for days at a time, and the
Yeah.
Hopi the same. And what those ceremonies did was established a continuity of dialogue relationship with the elemental plasma intelligences, who are
Yeah.
actually very, very angry, I think, at being ignored. Actually, I think,
Mm-hmm.
we often tell the story. We did this Trimorti, South France conference, almost 10 years ago now. And we decided part of the conference was to put in a labyrinth. And we did the magnetic alignment, and we started with the stones. And then, about, I don't know, a couple dozen local people came, and they were very earnest. And we put that labyrinth in one afternoon, and they walked that labyrinth intentionally. And that night, it was the biggest storm, I mean, angry storm in 10 years, right there, hours
Mm.
later. And we knew what happened. Those elementals were pent up, angry at having been ignored for so many years.
Mm.
Because these magnetic lines are basically large scale plasma intelligences. And actually, it has to do with the gnomes and the larger plasma beings, from elementals, gnomes, up to angelics. And the gnomes are famous for steering lightning storms, for example. So
Mm.
I think it's beautiful that you made that connection. You have the indigenous blood, and people can read some of the other stories at goldenmean.info/rain. But this is another beautiful example that people can take responsibility. But in the long term, there needs to be a continuous dialogue with the elements. Like the children should return to that labyrinth or that stone circle and do a
Mm-hmm.
regular. And eventually, there's a dialogue, and then the storms actually become steerable. And we had all the pictures of steering tornadoes at goldenmean.info/dowsing. And so then I thought we might, at least do some conversation speculation about the major storms recently in Kentucky and the tornadoes.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that the continuity, I mean, obviously is essential because it's relationship building.
Exactly.
And and I definitely like to, massively tweak, what we did. It's not like, okay, you show up for, an hour and a half or something and then you're good, you did your duty. I
Yeah,
mean, like you said, the other tribes and peoples that had these connections were doing it for days. It was a part, it was like a living
that's
prayer
right. And it
of
was
their
done
connection with the
in
land.
time with the seasons, in time with the
Yes.
solstice. And there was, the Hopis would know that when it's time to do the next set of rituals, and they felt that the climate would go into chaos. They predicted the climate would go into chaos if they stopped doing their ceremonies. The Iroquois knew it, the Hopis knew it. And so
Yeah.
the key thing is to recognize that these long plasma energy lines are intelligent, to really
Mm,
recognize anything that's a big plasma bloodstream is inherently mindful and has
mhm.
feelings. Really, as we say, you fall in love with the tornado falls in love with you, and then it follows you around. Well, understanding plasma intelligence is the beginning to this. And so that's
Mm,
why I thought also then, for example, supposing there was a group that was studying the recent tornadoes for the Midwest, Kentucky, and elsewhere that were, some of the worst in decades, um,
right.
and really wanted to actively and seriously understand and prevent that from happening again at a very
Mhm.
high geobiological level. I was going to try to say a few words to that issue. I
Yes.
mean, we have the goldenmean.info/geobiology, where we describe in detail how to map the magnetic lines, Hartmann, Curry, Paley, Palm lines, and the major magnetic lines. But in general, what would be the procedure to discover how tornadoes navigate locally? What is a procedure? And
Mhm.
I think just a few hints here. One
Yeah.
is that major magnetic lines are not just intelligent, they are ancestor memory. Any Aboriginal can tell you song line, dreaming track. And so, the relationship you describe with the ancestors is a beautiful introduction to that part of the story. And
Mm,
so, supposing you were a geobiologist who began to understood indigenous wisdom about this, and you understood, like, oh, where did they cut that mountain over there for mining, and where did they cut that mountain to put in a highway? And you make a map of the ancient strongest magnetic lines, and then you find out which ones are bleeding,
mm,
which ones have been wounded, which ones have been cut.
mhm.
I mean, the story comes to mind when we set up our community Circle of Life in Waynesville, Asheville, North Carolina. And up the hill, it was Cherokee Sacred Burial Ground. And one day, the spring that fed the whole community had dried up.
Right.
And, all the village shamans came together and had this little, oh, well, what are we going to do to bring back? And so they went up there and they asked the spring. There was a huge ancient tree where the spring was, and they sat at the bottom of the tree. And basically the tree said, well, it wanted a circle of women, actually, in that case. Then the circle of women sat there and they had a conversation with the tree. And it was incredible. The tree spoke to those women that spring under the tree. And basically it said, the vroom vroom cut my roots. And sure
Mm,
enough, a big bulldozer had recently wounded the roots of that tree, building up a road up there. And so they did a ritual healing the roots of this tree. And
mm,
within days, that spring
mm,
came back. The spring in that tree talked to that circle of women and said exactly what magnetic line had been wounded and why it was mad. So
right.
anyway, a geobiologist could actually have a conversation with the magnetic lines of the area and make a map of the major magnetic lines, and then find out which ones were damaged. And that would give you a clue of, the famous old story that tornadoes go out of their way to destroy a metal trailer park because it feels like bleeding to the plasma,
Mhm.
where the tornado will
Yes.
never destroy the sacred stone circle because the stone circle feels like life to the tornado.
Mm. And so do you feel that was what was happening in those recent storms there?
Well,
Ah.
I, I had this image once. We took a trip driving across California, and we were driving to Mount Shasta. And I can
Mhm.
never forget how horrible it was. I mean, 10 or 20 or 50, 100 miles of driving, nothing but dust bowl and dead elementals everywhere you look.
Yeah.
synthetic agriculture, agribusiness of the worst kind, as far as the eye can see for hundreds of miles. And then we
Right.
got to Mount Shasta. And
Mm-hmm.
and Mount Shasta was this little oasis in that desert of elementals, but
Yeah.
there was very, very little to attract rain there. So, I mean, that's an example that unfortunately America has been ignoring its elemental forces for hundreds of years now. So there's
Right.
some very angry elementals out there, magnetic lines. Take serious
Absolutely.
work, serious
And
work.
and even as I was listening and tuning in when we were doing the rain work, and many of us had the same thought, is that tourists come here. Tourism is the biggest business. There's like 3 to 5 million people that come in a year. And, they come in and they like just leave their stuff and they're like, I want to be healed or I want to experience this thing. And then they're also going, I don't want it to rain on my vacation.
Yeah.
Don't rain. Don't rain. And they're like invoking, like they're like, please, they're invoking that. And
Yeah.
so for us, and particularly for the little kids, we were like, let, all of those that said like we don't want it to rain, that like we really do, we're the ones that live here and like we invite you to rain. And that was a big thing too, because there's all these, there
Yeah.
there is relational happenings with the elementals, but it might not be the way that we're wanting it to be, even like as it's it took 10 days longer to get to the same cold temperature this fall and this winter, because it was staying warm. And again, I feel like it's humans going, I don't want it to be cold, and so I'm like going outside and saying, please get cold. Like let the temperature go down, do your thing, elementals.
It's the yearning that steers. That's right. The Sufis would know. And that reminds me of another very short story. So we did this week-long program after a month of lectures around California. This is 20 years ago. And then we did this week-long program at Joshua Tree, famous, St. John's Tree in California. It's a very famous sacred place. And the
Yes.
place was a desert. And we did
Mhm.
this week-long ritual, and we did the solar shamans, and the whole group did a shamanic solar journey into the plasma magnetic heart of the sun. And they actually saw through the heart of the sun. And it was very intense and very, probably even too powerful. And the thing is, by the last 2 days, it was pouring rain. I mean, we had storm rain, just lots and lots of, and that's true. So then, the following day after the event, we like went down to the local cafe or something. And I was like looking around, kind of smiling, like, hey, we just healed your desert. It's turning green, And
Yeah.
no, everyone in the cafe was, well, what an inconvenience to my golf game, And I
Oh,
realized, these people wanted to be in a desert. To me,
yes.
it's horrible. It's just,
Yes.
they don't understand that if it's not green, plasma is not alive.
Right.
I'm just not a desert person. Sorry, but anyway, but the point
Yeah.
about the yearning is anyway, so there's lots of beautiful lessons here. I just wanted to mention that some of the most advanced geobiology schools in the world, Lausanne,
Mhm.
Stefan Cardinot, lots of links there at goldenmean.info/geobiology. But if
Mhm.
anybody actually wants to study tornado steering, and we know there's a group in Western Canada that was doing major steering of storms. So a serious shamanic group could in fact take on the steering of major storms and talking to those large elemental beings. Reminds me of my days with at Findhorn with Dorothy. We were talking to
Right.
intelligences. Those were the days.
Wow. Now, what would you say to like weather modification? Because like so much, like even those storms and the recent tornadoes, like the trajectories of them were really peculiarly accurate, and like paralleled to each other. And that's happening all around the world, is this modulation. What would
Yeah.
you say to that, and how we can, on the ground crew, assist the elementals when there's like there's many different things kind of going against them.
Yeah. I knew Tom Bearden when he was working on the Russian woodpecker research, which is longitudinal interferometry. And you have these giant pictures of these huge rectilinear patterns in the clouds that go for 50 miles in all directions. And it's obviously a longitudinal, what he calls scalar. And that
Hmm.
does create a compression gradient in the water vapor And that will definitely steer major storms. And that is, unfortunately, the opposite of living plasma, and quite sad. And even
Right.
planting these silver iodine crystals, which is basically implosive capacitance. So yes, the concept of weather modification is, I want, if you want to say it's inherently evil, it's just, not just evil, it is, when they fail to understand the plasmas are mindful and they're intelligent. It's just like, you know, it reminds me of when we were teaching dowsing years ago, there was the saying of, well, they just drilled the well and the well missed the water vein. And
Right.
if the dowser is a beginning dowser and needs to steer that water vein into the well, the dowser goes out there with the hammer and these rods and percussively creates a piezoelectric shock wave, and that can steer the water vein. But then the story ends with saying, but the advanced dowser would never, ever, it's like, you know, trying to hit a snake to move. No, the advanced dowser talks to that water vein, which is a
Mm,
much higher level, much higher leverage. And obviously, and they said, you know, the advanced dowser gets very good at talking to water veins, but water veins get very good at knowing pure intention. Like, if you want me to steer the water over because these kids are going to be happy over here, wonderful. But if you cause me to steer a water vein and you're going to build a polluting, you know, industrial plant, that water vein is not going to listen the next time because it knows.
right. Right.
So the water veins even discern pure intention very quickly. So, but the point is that talking to these plasma beings is the key thing to recognize mindfulness. We need to begin to recognize mindfulness as plasma in our environment, or we're in trouble. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely. We need a planet to live on. Uh, so we're just talking about, oh yeah, just talking to plasma beings.
Yes.
Like, and how would people go about doing that? Like, I guess we get, maybe this might shift into growing your aura or in those ways, but how would someone go about doing that hasn't before?
I remember Dorothy at Findhorn saying, well, there was an anthill showed up just outside the community, and I had to go out and talk to the anthill. And she said that was painful. They were grouchy. But on the other hand, you know, when we put in the labyrinth at the farm, the magnetic lines are so touchy feely, and the gnomes in the back feel incredible, beautiful. We had the Seneca Twilight Niche, but that's kind of another story. But the point being that is that the magnetic line has a feeling body, which is perceptible as light. So if you're accustomed to moving your aura outside your body and embedding your aura in an energy line, the same way you would embed it in a tornado, you know, the instructions for steering a tornado start with feel the pain of that tornado. And then
Hmm.
the tornado, the plasma being invites you to embed, and the clairvoyant can see the bioplasmic streamers going from the belly of the shaman, embedding in the twister. And that would
Hmm.
also be true of a magnetic line. So it, you know, it is the extension of the practice of compassion, which is the practice of implosion, actually.
Mm. And so it would be a merging
Yes,
practice
yeah,
too,
that
then.
exactly
Which
embeddability.
is, yeah, embeddability, which is shareability.
That's right.
And how would also, because in my experience too, this summer, but also just in general, I mean, the elemental energies within our own body, like the water in our own body, is part of that communication. It feels like with like the water, of that spring or that well. So is it
Exactly.
also being able to consciously move with the elementals in your own body to then merge and communicate? Like, do you use that elemental energy to communicate with the other elemental too?
Well, so that's it. They call them the water beings, the vivre. They call the large water plasma beings here in France.
Vivre?
Vivre, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, and but you know, if you're passing by a river, then a lot of times you feel the need to pass water. Well, actually, the water inside you is wanting to join the water outside you, especially if that water outside you is part of an eternal flow. So that
Whoa.
whenever you get near some water that has found a connection to eternal flow, the water inside you will want to touch the water outside you. And and this is the dune concept, it's the sacred water that's actually the communicator. And that's the physics of phase conjugation in hydrogen, so fractal in the water bond and your DNA bond. So the water is absolutely the mechanism of communication. That's very true. And so purifying the water inside your body in order to embed in that communication, that's a very good insight. And then combining that with the idea that ancestor memory, literally ancestor words, are running down that song line, that dreaming track. And so being able to connect with something indigenous there, sacred space, it's all part of the process of embedding in the land. What the Aboriginals call Abraxas point, where the woman returns to the place of her birth, where the DNA is most fractal to the land, to reassume the leverage of embedding in the grid.
And that could even be like the listening of maybe hearing those songs and
Exactly.
like that, and
Yeah.
singing them, even
Yeah.
if you don't know what they are, but just like that spontaneously happens to me a lot, and
Yeah.
that is helpful, right? So
Yes.
that's something that people could do.
Exactly. And then if the right song is sung, that part of the magnetic line restores its coherence, and then it restores centripetal force, which is rainmaking. Another example of this, that we've told this story many times, but our friend in Perth, Malcolm Borgward, was doing these rituals to heal the ancient curses between the men shaman and the women shaman of Australian tribes, which is an old story. And he would do these rituals cross country in the indigenous community. And every time he did it cross country, huge rainstorms followed them every time. So, and that was a case of healing the pain, in this case, between the men tribe and the women tribe, actually. So
Yeah.
ancestor pain is very much part of this equation of rainmaking.
It feels like to be able to work with these big plasma beings and these elementals, we have to thus be healed in our own energy. We can't have like leaky auras and like, then that begets leaky
Exactly.
elementals.
Yeah.
So what are some ways that people can well, let's go to the significance. You've said it before, but it's so important to just keep on repeating the significance of growing your aura and incubating it and like sealing it up so that you don't get, ET parasitic beings and all of those energies going on. Like, what is the significance of the aura and how can people begin to heal and restore and build it?
Yeah, well, your aura is plasma. Obviously, it's a plasma worm, and that plasma worm ultimately wants to join the infinite plasma worm of immortality, really, which is
Mm,
Hey Ave and the Earth grid and the ancestor grid. And so the ancestor memory is waiting for your aura to be coherent enough to be immortal, and then to be absorbed in that, which is successful death. So healing the aura is what it's all about. To continue the theme we were just talking about, so going back to find your own ancestor memory, and where like this, they say, feel the maximum yearning of the death of you at the moment of death of your ancestors. So you go back to whether it's your grandfather, grandmother, whoever it was that was the patriarch or matriarch of your family, and you go back and find what their yearning was at the moment of death.
hmm
And they say you find the wind in your sails. What that means is you find the direction of your plasma. And so healing that, obviously, which is an extension of family constellation therapy, which
Right.
fits the story beautifully, actually, which,
Yeah.
the plasma therapy net is known for being helpful in that regard, because it increases the depth of the trance. And the bliss trance, how kids see without their eyes, is also how you see plasma.
Right. Well, it totally makes sense that you need an expansive, full aura to then be able to have the information because it is information. The aura is information, and
Exactly.
then you can embed with your ancestors, with the land of where you're at, like all of those pieces, and then you become shareable and embeddable. Right? Is that correct?
Yeah, and then you can then when you close your eyes. Now, for example, I mean, you felt it here a little bit, but on the magnetic line to Canada, which is very
Oh yeah,
strong here,
so
and
strong.
which is wonderful. It's and it's Cathar, it's ancient, it's Grail memory, it's the whole thing. So when I lie on this energy line and close my eyes and let my Kundalini, I could have flashes of light, and I know I have barely begun to tap the memory in that magnetic line, but I
Mhm.
know that when I feel that intensity of that lightning from that trance experience, I can get answers to any question. actually, at
Mm,
times like that, which anytime you have some sustainable bliss plasma, it will answer any question. That's kind of cool.
absolutely.
And including how to steer a ley line.
Yeah. And would plasma be synonymous just for definition terms? I don't have that like intellect, and I think other people it'll be helpful for them. But could be plasma be synonymous with chi? Like, is that what it is? Is it life force? Like, like what is the difference? Because I know that there's like the chi body, and how would those? Yeah, explain that.
You're right. We need science here because we can get that way. We have language of rigor and we become shareable. So
Yes,
plasma technically simply means a cloud of charge. That's what it
a
means.
cloud of charge.
Yeah. But now, obviously, you say, what is charge? Well, compressibility of charge is the ether. Therefore, that's everything. So technically, in physics, there's nothing that's not charge. So we haven't defined too much yet. But
Right.
but a cloud of charge normally requires heat to sustain that charge in the distributed state.
Okay.
However, under certain circumstances, plasma can sustain a cloud of charge without heat, called cold plasma, which is profoundly healing. That's well known in medicine, Therify.net as an example. And the ability to keep plasma distributing without heat, we say the key is negentropy, which is fractal implosion or phase conjugation. So that's a little background.
Hmm.
Now, classically, the term chi is very close, but actually, um, technically, in this case, chi would more accurately represent the voltage, which
Okay.
is the attractor. So, for example, if you move with the quality of grace in yoga or tai chi, and if that
Hmm.
quality of grace has you know, the quality of deacceleration to a 0 point gracefully, then at the end of that spiral with your finger or your body, you should feel a little prickle of capacitance, which is charge, which you call chi. And so
Hmm.
what you've done is you've built up the voltage, which is simply the pressure.
Hmm.
Voltage is a name simply for pressure of charge, which then can attract charge. So
Mm.
technically the plasma is the cloud of charge itself, whereas the chi, if you think of it as voltage, is the difference in pressure which can then attract the charge. So
So the
voltage,
chi's necessary to attract it.
exactly. The chi would then be the pressure. So if you did a sacred dance and you built up some voltage, then you can attract more plasma or charge. That'd be simple. And the fact that your aura is cold plasma is a beginning of a way to think about the fact that you can achieve perfected distribution without heat. And remember, every ancient sage will tell you, spiritual life is the flame that does not consume, which is cold plasma. It's a cold fire. Well,
Mm.
all the ancients talk about the cold fire. Well, and heaven or plains of Chiron or whatever you want to, Champs-Elysees, is that field effect which is perfectly distributed without heat. And heat is only a name for disorder in this sense, so it's obviously not the goal.
Mhm. Yeah. And the reason why I wanted to go into that definition because I think it's so important to get because your big thing and the big thing if we're talking about going to the fifth dimension and like and ascending and ideally moving into these like ET advanced beings is to have a large aura is to experience bliss. That is like what it is. So understanding that and being like, we need to build our chi. We need to then, and then
Absolutely.
how can we then? Well, is that the main way then to attract the charge of the plasma, or like, is there other ways of doing that?
Well, I mean, a classic example. So you did your sacred dance or your yoga, whatever your bliss ritual was, and then you go to your sacred place, wherever your altar is or your sacred spot in the room, place of power, and then you enter the stillness and you feel that intense plasma in your body, but then you begin to feel that
Mm.
aura grow and grow. And then you feel the field outside your body. So all the little crackles in the room and then the whole area begin to feel like they're inside your body, which is we call distributed awareness or inhabit the array. And the
Yeah.
point is that more axes of spin symmetry are then superposed, called being in the next dimension. And they even
Hmm.
call it the next density. And it's literally the density of the number of axes of spin that are being superposed because of that perfected distribution fractal, which is inhabiting the array. So this whole
Hmm.
bit about being next dimensional simply only literally means increasing the size and therefore the leverage of your aura. Literally,
Mm.
now you can steer bigger tornadoes.
And it's super helpful for me to just have it be it's that. Like,
It is.
that's what you need to focus on. That's the intention. That's how you lucid dream. That's how you bring memory through death, right?
Yeah. And, we say we took the power spectra, the harmonics of kids' brain waves, and we measured the moment they get the trance to see without their eyes. And then we took that same frequency cascade, phase conjugate and brainwaves, and stuck it in the plasmatherapy.net and replicably trigger lucid dreaming, which is
Mm-hmm.
distribution in that array. And so now, when we're ready to talk about higher dimensional beings, and I thought we were doing our ET
We're,
story,
yes, we're going to. We're going to get there.
and that's what
Yeah, and
leads us to that idea that they got there because plasma got intelligent. That's how they got the story of the nine, for example.
okay, so going into the ET history because my peeps love this and I want to correlate it because it feels to me and I can see knowing some of the galactic history that there's major themes of like genetic modification of humans happening right now and that has been a huge theme genetics through like the cosmic through the cosmos. So how are the echoes of our greater galactic history coming into play now? And why are we doing that? Why are we modifying? And what is kind of like the goal of whatever agendas that are around have? And where is that coming from? Like, why is this happening?
Thank you for having a small question.
Yeah.
No, that's
Well,
a
I
big.
mean, well, you can
Well,
handle the big questions.
yeah, that's what we're here for. That's what we get paid for.
Right, exactly.
Well, many places to start on that question. But first, let's say that, the human species, as all species, is nothing but a story of genetic modification. The
Right.
story of genetic modification is history. And calling one part of genetic modification artificial and the other not is pretty arbitrary. The question
Right.
simply is what's producing what you call sustainability or ensoulment, or you might call it immortality, the ability
Mm,
to take an aura through death. What's making a soul in the DNA? And so the more specific part of that question should be, in my view, the
yeah.
study of what kind of genetics enables kids to have a soul, which means ability to lucid dream and take memory through death, which technically would be longitudinal coherence in their aura. And the history of that question, to give it, for example, versus genetic engineering designed to make the corn a different color or something like that,
Right.
not recognizing that long-term sustainability in DNA is the longitudinal coherence we call a soul. So actually, technically, in this sense, once we recognize that access to bliss is the ability to have a big enough aura to have a soul, so if the goal of genetic engineering was to make bliss, that's a whole nother story.
Mm.
Like, how could the kids have a soul? And that's again a big question, but there's a place we could start that story,
Great.
which is the piece that I've studied for so many years. We were studying Anton Parks after I wrote my book on goldenmean.info/Enki's story, which is actually the Ra and Abraham and the Osiris green face, the whole story. It's all at fractalfield.com/fusion in the blood. So then Anton Parks writes this big story where Enki wakes up in a cloning cooking pot in Pleiades, and Enki's ancestors, presumably the Anunnaki, even in the books with Anton Parks and all history, Enki's family, who his assignment was to be cloner, they were parasites. They were famous for genetic engineering, but they were not interested in powering humans. No, they were here to make slaves and snack food, obviously. And that's where the
Right.
original, the Adam and Eve story comes from Adam Takadama. It's not a pretty story. But, and here's the but. So now comes along Elena Danaan, and we've been in touch since our meetings at Portal to Ascension. We're going to be doing some interviews, and we're having fun, actually. I like Elena, and she is in great agreement with Alex Collier, who's also an old friend with the Andromedans, and Megan Rose, who I've also been in touch with. And now Michael Salla has become their voice for exopolitics, and everybody agrees, which is kind of cool. So what's Elena Danaan say? Well, if you get her book, I actually got it out here. So when you look in Elena Danaan's book, Alien Races, and you look up the Anunnaki, like, was Anton Parks right or wrong? Hello.
Mm-hmm.
you know,
Mhm.
because Anton Park's job, his other name, Nudimud, means the cloner. So this is an example. If Osiris, was a cloner, then, were they making a soul or not?
Right. Right.
The history of genetic engineering on this planet, this is a big part of the story. Well, it turns out she says that the Anunnaki were part of a parasitic group that also came from the Orion sector, and they were famous for, get this, genetic engineering.
Right. That's
This was
that's what we are.
that's where we are. And
Yeah.
the other negative force, what she calls Siakar, what I call Draco, and I've had 2 interviews now with Johann Fritz about the Draco. You can see all this at Fusion in the Blood. They also, what's they're famous for? Genetic engineering for parasitic purposes. So a lot of the history of genetic engineering around here has a parasitic purpose. Hello,
Right.
Monsanto, But now there's a hint of hope here. Here's the hint of hope.
Okay.
Yes, so there's a happy part of the story. Let's hope.
Yes.
The hint of hope was that Enki, with his partner Thoth Tahuti, whom we later called David, the line of David, Thutmose, Thule, the original name for Atlantis, the original name for Egypt, Thutmose, the original name for the North Pole, the original name for the South Pole is all Thule, Thoth. Well, who was this fella? He was
Yeah.
running around adopting indigenous peoples, teaching lucid dreaming as under the name of Viracocha Quetzalcoatl. So,
Mhm.
they were cooking up something useful in the middle. And so this is the story. Then now we move to Andrea Puharich, who is sitting there. I knew him very well. We hung out because we were psychotronics teachers. So he's sitting there when Phyllis Schlemmer is teaching Gene Roddenberry to write the movie The Nine. So Phyllis
Mhm.
Schlemmer, Andrea Puharich, and and I was there with Andrea. He says, "Yeah, well, first the guy who's talking to us says his name is Tom, and then he says that later we realized he meant Atum, and then they realized it was the Atum of Osiris they're talking to, and they called themselves the Nine." Which is a very intelligent plasma being, interstellar. The reason the politics of Anunnaki were the Nine was because where you fit in a big plasma intelligence, that's how powerful you were.
Right.
And Elena Denon says she just went to Ganymede and met the Nine, and it was incredibly powerful. What she means
Wow.
is she calls them the seeders,
Mm.
which are the ones who planned. And Anton Parks calls them Kadistu, from which gets the word Kiristu, Christ, and we get the word caduceus, phase conjugation. So obviously, and Vincent Bridges called them the galactic core cultures, but obviously there is an interstellar intelligence, and Lena Dunham is calling them the Intergalactic Federation, who is back here and had intent behind the genetic diversity of Earth. Earth was like a very valuable library of the most diversity you could have just about anywhere. So it was a
Yeah.
very, very important. So, although humans' technology is, dinosaurs farting is not a way to make cars move. That's primitive. No, bad news.
Very primitive.
So we
Yes.
shouldn't brag about our technology. It ain't.
No.
But we got something. We got a genetic
Mhm.
library here that could make kids with a soul, Humpty Dumpty's
Mm.
egg. And the Interstellar Federation is back here, the Cedars, because they just kicked out the Draco, the Nebu, and the Greys from the solar system. And I think Elena Donon's right. And now they're saying humans have
Mm.
a chance to have governments that make decisions based on whether kids have a soul, whether kids have an aura, whether kids have access to bliss. We've been saying for years, if you can teach your child how to have a bliss experience, that is the only real definition of culture.
Mm.
So anyway, I see some hope in these threads, and we've been making films about this. There's, a dozen films about this on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/Dan Winter Fractal Field.
Yeah.
And, but so where should we go from there? What do you think?
How can so there's this hope, there's this shift
Yeah.
that's happening.
Yes.
How can people know what is in alignment with ensoulment versus not?
Yeah. Yeah.
And how can people align, cuz there's, there's huge amounts of light and positivity coming into the planet, and then there's also still like residue and other kind of parasitic energies around. How can they also, well, we'll just start with that. How can they discern which one is ensoulment, which one isn't?
Yeah, that's right. So basically, we need to start making government, political, and university decisions based upon whether or not this decision creates an aura or not.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you have an aura, then you have an immune system. If you have an aura, then you can take memory through death. Then you can lucid dream. So having an aura is like, and
Everything.
yet universities and government don't even believe that aura exists.
Yeah.
Oops, we got a problem. And
Right.
yet, GDV, there's a dozen ways now to measure the charge radiance of your biology. So
Yeah.
once we begin to recognize the physics, for example, did that architecture, did that building create an aura or not? Measure whether that makes your aura grow, because you can measure the same thing by measuring whether that building will make a seed germinate if it's
Mm-hmm.
implosive capacitance. So we need to teach the physics of what it is to have an aura, which is the same physics of what it is to get access to bliss, actually.
Right.
Because, which is, medically, that's recognizing heart rate variability is fractal, and fractal heart rate variability is the fastest way to measure immune health. That's HRV. And now that same harmonic inclusiveness perfected by golden ratio identifies human bliss in brain waves. So the physics is out there now. We must begin to teach a science. So what religion has been calling your grace and your chi and your baraka and your shaktipat for, and it's correct, but we need to teach the physics of spirituality so that governments can make intelligent decisions. So for example, when we say the clairvoyants say now that if you get
Mm-hmm.
they're seeing that your aura begins to dissociate from the center of your body. Actually, you can
Mm-hmm.
see you're literally beside yourself. And once that's measured in the geobiology school, it's the first thing they measure, that you can actually make medical decisions based on the restoration of aura.
Yeah.
GDV, we have auraseer.com as an example.
Yes.
So that would be one example of an answer.
Yeah, that's a great example. And that's what I saw. He pointed to the V. That's what we're
Yeah.
calling it now.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that's what I've been seeing too with people that have had it or people that have had high level C, is that it's disensoulment.
Yeah.
It's like it's where that's what I've been seeing clairvoyantly with that. And so it's like how to bring it back in.
Right.
Um, and what are some of the ways to do that? Like so that the parasitic energies like aren't there, and to like stay embodied and ensouled, like as practical ways that people can do that, and possibly connected to heart coherence because you've done so much with that as well.
Well, yes. I mean, heart coherence is enabled by grounding, among other things. And even Therify, blissplasmatherify.net is enabled by grounding,
Mm-hmm.
which unfortunately people living in tall metal buildings in big cities, they lose that fractal relationship to ground and therefore phase lock to the grid,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and therefore loss of centripetal force. And we could say practically that our largest Therify centers have reported significantly that they were able to help many, if not most people with the V side effects. And it's very simple because the plasma is centripetal. And I
Yeah.
should also mention our friend Blue Eagle in Canada has described, and we can get those links for you, a series of basically hygiene and ritual things to eliminate the V side effects, et cetera. And all of those things are simple. Get more
Yeah.
centripetal. That's
Right.
that simple. And
And how do you do that? Ground?
well, yeah,
Have
grounding,
bliss experience?
yeah, we have the running water from the mountain in this little behind the house, which is pretty wonderful for grounding. And the cold water is wonderful. But basically, knowing where the magnetic line crosses are in your neighborhood and using the leverage of those power points to reestablish the phase relationship of your body to ground. And of course, the live food diet and your yoga and your lifestyle, everything, and trying to live in biology architecture, all the things we've been talking about for all these years. But yes, that is the issue, is to reestablish the centripetal force of your aura.
Yeah. I did I there's a man in Sedona now that has the Therify. And so I went and did it again because I did it at your house, and It's just insane. It's so incredible. Like the plasma beams, like these giant plasma beams, like yeah, came to me and were like working on me and like doing all this stuff, and I'm just it's incredible. So I highly recommend wherever anyone is to go try it out.
Well, thank you. It's a very lovely to hear you say that. I would say that even a device like that Therify there's a lot of things that can happen, but the placement of the device really matters. And if it's in a living air, a living charge environment, not in a real bad geopathic zone, but and the fact that you are relatively light and sensitive and, makes a huge difference, so that you were ready for that experience and that you could see. And that the plasma around a Therify that's in a forest, for example, will become like the family kitten. It's a pet, and after a while you don't even need to turn it on, and after a while you don't
Right.
need the Therify either. Actually, what you need is living plasma, and Therify just
Right.
happens to be a way to feed that.
Is that what it's doing? It's feeding the
Yeah.
plasma?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And
Oh,
that's why, and that the living plasma on Therify, it's a funny story we often tell, but it's true that advanced Therify practitioners know that if someone comes in the room with even a slightly negative attitude, you really need to ask them to come back a different day, because the plasma is like a pet kitten and it knows it immediately.
yeah.
So if your pet kitten likes you, then if you're hurting on one part of your body, your kitten will lay down next to you and run its motor. Well, the
Yes.
plasma from Therify is exactly the same way. If it likes you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I've had that happen with the well water underneath my house where I had like this energy thing that was going on, and I like got in the bath and it just healed me because I have this relationship with it,
That's right.
where,
Yeah,
because there's this connection.
that's right.
Um, but I would love to talk about, so just going back out again, into the stars and speaking a little bit to the Orion bloodlines and why they were using the gold and why they were so particular about the bloodlines, what they were trying to do but couldn't actually do, which ensoulment is the resolution to, just so that people kind of understand, because most of the people that listen to me love all of the different galactic races, and for some reason Orion's just like left out when it's like so incredibly significant. But why were they doing that, and what was their agenda and goal that's we're seeing ripples of right now too?
I mean, I think it may be, we have our goldenmean.info/Orion showing all those star maps. But I think Elena Denon may have done the best job of outlining the biggest of the intelligent cultures in the Orion sector. And there are many. It's true
Hmm.
that many of them were unfortunately negative. The Nebu, the Greys, the Anunnaki, and the Draco all had
Hmm.
major, parasitic operations in the Orion sector, unfortunately. However, um, when Enki was designing, as under the name of Hermes, the Great Pyramid, the star map of Orion there had a very particular function, because
Hmm.
that's literally where their ancestors were from.
Hmm.
And that's a big story, but let's go to the part of the story that you're asking about, which is, what's the deal with the gold and the gold powder?
Yes.
Yeah.
Why something outside of yourself too?
Well, at that time, first of all, remember, Sitchin said correctly, but incomplete, was that they were mining the gold to repair the atmosphere on the home planet.
Right.
There's a germ of truth there, but like usual, Sitchin kind of mistranslates many things. Like high word firestone, I will raise a Shem unto the Lord. And actually, it didn't mean I will raise an altar to the Lord. It meant I will raise a negentropic age reversing electric field unto the Lord. Literally, I will do age reversal, otherwise I get old catastrophically. And that's exactly what those Anunnaki were talking about
Right.
continuously during their
Right.
arrival was, we're getting old catastrophically.
Yes. Yes.
And so that plasma tube, the light bulb you see carved in the pyramid walls, which is now the logo for Therify.net, people say it's a light bulb. And then now we realize it's a plasma tube to make the kind of electric field to reverse aging. That's what Shem
Hmm.
unto the Lord was, Shem being black hole access. So what did that have to do with gold power? So basically, first thing to know is that if you actually map where gold deposits occur on Earth, naturally, eventually you will find a dodecaecosa grid, a sacred grid.
Mm.
So it's
Mm.
actually real physics that the unpacked stellation of the dodecaecosa valence electron symmetry, that is gold. If you continue that stellation, you get to the Earth grid. And that is what makes the Earth grid centripetal, obviously. So there's actually a germ of truth that gold powder can do atmosphere maintenance. There's a whole book about that. It's called 2/3 by David Myers and David Percy. And basically they call it planet taming, which is retilt the Earth grid so the atmosphere doesn't get away. And gold is a tuner timer seed for that. So that's the one level of truth. The other level of truth is, yes, they were eating the gold. At that time, the Draco and the Anunnaki couldn't make gold themselves. Now they can. Actually, in South America, they had a way of turning copper into gold, it's documented. And in Egypt, most of the gold you see there was made alchemically. And the most recent film that the previous film to this on our YouTube channel is about the science of alchemy. We go into that in great detail. Point being that if you can use a spark gap to render a gold atom stable as a mono atom, that's what makes it soluble. That's what makes it edible. Showbread, manna, ormies, the spice. Don't it make your brown eyes blue? Your eyes will turn blue and you'll live forever, but read the fine print. You might lose your soul, which is how Thoth described addiction to gold powder. So the natural sources of ormies amulets, which are rhodium, iridium, and there's an aloe-based and there's seawater-based ormies. So there were many uses for the gold at the time, but gold mining was the story of the Anunnaki for multiple reasons: atmosphere maintenance and producing what was called the spice, which at that time they were using. And it was still served. Every full service city of the dead, like Rennes-le-Chateau, they served their gold powder in these pine cone-like shapes. You can see carved on the walls there. And that's what you do in a city of the dead, is you serve gold powder.
And why did they need it? Why did they do it?
Again, nice small question there. Well, trying to do a thumbnail version of the story, we believe that the Draco Siakar at the time of Theuba, there's a French book entitled Theuba, which is roots of the term Yahuwah, Yahweh, we believe, which is Thuban in Alpha Draconis, that the Draco culture at that time evolved from androgyny to replicating sexually. And at that time, and this is like hundreds of thousands of years ago, a war of the sexes evolved, actually. And a war of the sexes was the beginning. You see, when you go from androgynous to sexual reproduction, you can accelerate evolution. But, and this is the big but, you see, the war of the sexes, that was why Australia became a drought between the Aboriginals, and their name for genies is a Draco name, and their rules about reproduction are Draco, just like the caste system. And that's why there was a desert in Australia, was Draco marriage laws. And the Draco marriage laws were the beginning of, I call it the Humpty Dumpty's egg problem, the loss of soul, meaning the Draco lost long-term memory. They admit it. And we were to put it in Enki's terms, we were the vaccine to the Orion Wars. In other words, they did the genetics here because they needed a vaccine for the War of the Sexes, which was an interstellar problem.
And so what did they do? What was like, did they couldn't reproduce? Well, they wanted to start reproducing like male and female, but
no, they did reproduce sexually, but in the process, the Draco queens, which is now the White Queen, and the Johann Fritz met her, very scary, very scary being, and they are female dominated, and that's true, and so are the Pleiadian Tegotan, very female dominated, and there are issues. The Pleiadian Tegotans, they reproduce even sometimes asexually now, and the females are so dominant that the Andromedans say they're losing their soul also. And so there's many examples of losing soul. The Dracos genetically engineered the reticuli, which became the Greys, and they lost their soul. And so when when the Grey, the Khmer, which is later called Nebu by Elena Danaan, did the abductions after the MJ-12 signed the wrong treaty, they took the lucid dreamers because they were trying to cook up a soul, right? That's you, so look out.
Yeah. I don't know. They took me. I know.
Well,
So,
no, but you see, you have a skill there, which represents coherence in DNA, which is of interstellar significance. The ability to be a lucid dreamer is a seed for the evolution of our gene pool. Absolutely. And recognize what that it means. Long-term braid coherence in DNA was called boson 7 at Montauk and called microchloridians in the blood in Star Wars. It's literally implosion in the DNA that radiates longitudinally.
and that's the ability to ensoul. So that's a necessary
Exactly.
ingredient. Yes.
Exactly. Yes. Yes.
And so is that necessary then in the like conception like of a kid, like that ability in both people to then be able to ensoul?
Yeah, which means a cesarean section is bad news because you need the implosion of a birth canal. And in fact, if you read the Celtic manuals, the grandparents are present for the first night in the wedding bed. Do you know why?
No. Why? Well, I mean, I can guess.
Ancestor memory, absolutely.
What? They're bringing ancestral memory
In other words,
in that charge field?
yes, exactly. The moment of
What are they bringing through?
the long
what's the
wave.
purpose?
They're bringing the long wave. In other words, the long wave of an ancestral intent. So now that child could reflect the steerage of the intent of 100 generations.
Whoa. Okay. Interesting.
Yes. So in soul.
So it wasn't just creepy. It wasn't just creepy. There was purpose.
No. That I mean, they weren't like interfering. They were just like emotionally present because there's a long wave of ancestral intent that can inhabit moment of conception, moment of birth, moment of bliss, moment of death.
Whoa. Interesting.
It's a very
and
long.
So as we're moving towards an in vitro culture, as we're moving towards an infertile culture,
That's the tragedy.
Without well, I mean, definitely conception without intention. Oops,
Exactly.
All of these pieces, that is disturbing the ability to ensoul.
Exactly. So long wave memory, ancestral context. It's like we're doing everything possible wrong right now. Artificial insemination and artificial birth and artificial everything. Once we know what a soul is, we can begin to change all of that.
So what happens to those kids that are then like in vitro or like not like their soul is there, but like is it just not all there? Like how's that working?
I recommend studying the physics, and I do mean the physics of rebirthing, which I taught for years. Okay, so if you study how profound rebirthing, John Diamond, belly of the surrogate mother, deep breathing to the point of tetany, placental extract, extreme embedding, and then then you revisualize the max compression of the birth moment underwater, and you've got this incredible plasma convergence that emulates what should have happened at birth, which is charge implosion, long wave charge implosion. And that reestablishes, and then that brings memory through birth. That brings long wave context. That's called a soul.
Whoa. Would Therify help with that then? Like to...
We do know that Therify has been reported to be very helpful for relaxation and bliss during childbirth. But I would, use a note of caution there. But yes.
Post-birth. So there's been this theme that I've been noticing with different women my age that are connected, to the earth, connected to their bodies. And for some reason, what's been happening, and it might be just like, it might be a morphogenetic thing. I'm not sure, or like a collective consciousness thing where they're like, okay, I'm ready to have like a home birth and vaginally birth and like do this thing. And then what's been happening is like last minute, there's this C-section, and it's nothing that they planned. It's nothing that they planned.
Right. The doctor says, "Oh, we need to do a C-section now. Sorry,
Right. But it feels like there's something hard, like there's a block in the collective,
Exactly.
impulse to do that.
Ex-
Would you say that there's what would you
Exactly.
say that that is? Because I'm observing it and going, "Uh-oh, we've got an issue." Like, what is
Yeah.
that so that
Yeah.
it can be resolved?
Exactly. You've
Yeah.
identified the problem and it has to do with compression. In other words, to really feel the birth canal, you would need to feel all the ancestor memory, the long wave of intent, which means you need to feel all the pain too. And in practice, it could be that if you prepared for natural childbirth, which is, the stretching exercises and all the things they do, and then plan for the facility for an underwater birth, which is proven for much higher IQ kids, proven by measurement, underwater birthing. And here's the physics. Let me just give you an example of the physics from
Yeah.
the birthing physics. The reason IQ is so much higher for underwater birthing, simple physics actually. Not only does the birth canal reach a point of maximum compression at 0.618 into the length that's depicted at golden mean net inverse DNA ring. And so it's literally perfect birth canal is implosion perfected, the love hug wave perfected. That's what it is. But the rate of decompression as you come out of the birth canal, if that is more contiguous and less discontiguous, you see, the skull bones are literally dodecaecosa. They're a flower. So if the unpacking geometry can occur gracefully, the skull can unpack gracefully. So that rate of decompression on emerging from the birth canal is critical. That's part of the story of underwater birthing. So if you made a map over time of the pressure on the skull,
Right.
and look for continuity in that wave, you would discover how much memory comes through birth. It's that simple.
Wow. And would you say that the block in that you were saying it's maybe the not feeling of the ancestral pain? Like why it's going, oh, like C-section versus like going through that
Yes.
initiatory threshold? Is it like there's feeling all of it or something? The pain?
Yes.
Yeah?
Well, haven't got time for the pain. Well, it really is haven't got time for the memory. Even Nassim's wife is usefully teaching blissful childbirth now.
Right.
In blissful childbirth, bliss is a name for implosive compression. That's what it is, because that's what
Right.
enables radiance. And implosive compression is a name for the physics of childbirth. So obviously it could be blissful if you exercise and were healthy and prepared.
Yeah.
Then interstellar memory arrives. I mean, they
Right.
talk about stars in the rooms, and Michael Rice talks about, a star map of Draco showed up and shined their light. I mean, incredible interstellar stories from blissful childbirth. It's a gorgeous thing. But until we know what a soul is,
Wow. Okay. So we talked about conception, we got birth, we got all kinds of things. One piece that I want to touch on before we close um is the experience of bliss. Because I know that right now with a lot of the things going on, everyone's like, ugh. Like bliss is kind of the opposite of where a lot of the collective consciousness is at right now. And I know that a lot of people, just generally before these crazy times that are happening right now, we're going more towards, just like being on social media and devices or having like crazy psychedelic experiences to like they're seeking the bliss. And I know that you've spoken to psychedelics being like one of the pathways, but what are some positive like ways that we can initiate bliss for the youth but also like for ourselves during this time?
well, one thing to recognize is that the increase in compression in the electrical geometry around the planet, which even the ETs, if they're even talking about what was used to be called the photon cloud, we have more physics on that now, which means that bliss is actually more available. That's the good
That's
thing.
what I feel. It's definitely true.
It's more available because there's more compression available. And of course, it does mean that those who are not ready for compression will go crazy faster. That's true.
Oh,
Yeah. So, it's just like they put a crown on a king. The crown is actually implosive capacitance. If the king is thinking pure thoughts, his aura will increase and his emotions will control the weather of the kingdom. But if the king is angry when they put the crown on him, he will go nuts faster.
right.
So we have available increased compression for better or for worse. That's one thing.
Yeah.
So if we pay attention to our basic hygiene and make time for bliss. And we do the spa and the sunshine every day, regardless. And it's, if you make time for bliss and you know where your sacred spot is, do your practices, and it's very available. That's the good news. The bad news
Mm,
is true that everything about our culture is designed to prevent bliss, from
yeah.
diet to environment to law to, but once we realize that bliss is the way humans get immortal, we're going to need to change that culture.
Right. Absolutely. Oh, so good. Anything else that you want to share before we close out today?
Oh no, I think it's great, the work that you're doing to make this shareable, and we're both available to answer questions and to serve people in the future. People can find fractalfield.com, therify.net, flameinmind.com, our work, etc. Thank you for being supportive. I think actually it might be good if we visualize at some point we can set up a bit of a network of those who are working at rainmaking and tornado steering, because the group in Brazil is ready to network, and you are, and we are. So we could actually create some network. So we make that offer. I'm available, info@fractalfield.com. So we're very available. And
Yeah, we're
you're
shareable. That's our goal, right? We're shareable in all ways.
the shareablewave.com. That's Shelley.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Dan. I just love you so much, and I'm so grateful for all that you are and all that you do.
I knew that we'd have some fun. It's been great. And you're the great face for these things, because you have what the Sufis call baraka. People say, oh, well, I want to look at that face. Okay, well, then people will pay attention. So thank you for your smile too.
Just thanks the incarnational design for that so that people would be more excited about Bliss. I mean, I thought that Bliss already sold itself, but.
but you're the postcard for that. You're the logo for that. So,
Oh, thank you.
and I think your ancestors would be proud.
Oh, that's gonna make me cry and feel compassion and in bed. Oh, jeez. Thank you, Dan.
Blessings, blessings.
Bye bye.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
That was awesome.